everyone, it's Steph here. This is the Noveltea Corner and welcome to another Psy-Changeling video. For anyone who is new here, I am filming this as a series where I am rereading all of the books in Nalini Singh's Psy-Changeling series. I'm currently up to book 11 in this video. I do a very spoilery recap of the main relationship, as well as the greater world plot and some fun things that happen in the series that I am immensely enjoying doing this deep dive into the series and a bit of a close read of it. I'm also one of the co-hosts for the Psy-Changeling Readathon, so this is one of the books that we are reading for the month of April. And I have also just realised that Mara from Books Like Woe is also doing a Psy-Changeling podcast, and it is absolutely fantastic. She's just released her 4th episode, which is on Caressed by Ice, and I highly recommend that you check it out because I wish I could be as articulate as she is. She's amazing. And I'm really looking forward to hearing her thoughts on the books as she goes through them as well. So I'm just really excited that so many people are talking about the Psy-Changeling series at the moment because it truly is one of my favourite series of all time. So the book that we are discussing today is Tangle of Need, which is book 11 in the series, and I will not be holding this book up. It is hardback and therefore heavy to hold up. This series is paranormal romance. It's also got very urban fantasy / science fiction elements in it, but each book always features a main couple who are developing their relationship in the series, as well as the greater world plot that's going on. So in Tangle of Need, we are following Adria Morgan, who is the aunt of Indigo, who is one of the Snowdancer lieutenants. So the Snowdancers are the wolf pack. It is her relationship with Riaz Delgado, who is one of the Snowdancer lieutenants. Adria herself is a senior soldier. She's also an auto mechanic, and both Adria and Riaz are dominant wolves, and so this causes a lot of conflict in their relationship. In terms of content warnings for this book, probably aside from violence, gore, blood, all that sort of stuff that happens in the Psy-Changeling series, there is talk about a toxic relationship that Adria was in, and that does deeply affect her in this story, and it does come up time and time again. I don't think there's anything else that's unusual for this series, so if you're this far in, you probably are very used to what's going on. There's a lot of internal war happening within the Psy-Net. There's also a lot of things happening between the Psy and the Changelings, as well as the Human Alliance, which we revisit in this book as well. I'm going to put this book down and we're going to talk about it. So it took me a while to work out how I actually wanted to film this video and how I wanted to talk about the different things, because I actually think that Adria and Riaz's story makes up maybe a third of the greater story that's going on. So while it's prominent, it's also not the only thing that's happening. There's, in fact, a lot of things that are going on. Their relationship is not one of my favorites in the series, but on reread, I enjoyed it a little bit more than I have in the past, and it really made me think about the dynamics of these two characters. So the way that I'm going to talk about it is I'm going to talk about Adria and Riaz's main storyline, which is very similar to how I've run the videos in the past. Then I am going to talk about Hawke and Sienna's storyline because they have a very big thread in this story. I'll have other world building things, and I've broken that down into different sections as well because there's some pretty big world things that are happening in this book. And then I have my fun things, which is just a section of all those little moments that Nalini Singh includes that give me all the warm fuzzy feelings about this book and the series as a whole. All right, so the first thing that I want to say about Adria and Riaz's relationship is it's not an easy one, and they're both very dominant characters, and they both are coming to this relationship with a lot of anger and a lot of unresolved issues, and they take it out on each other a lot. So you have to be aware of that going into it because it affects everything that happens to them, and they spend a lot of time on again, off again, arguing with one another and trying to figure out a way how this relationship could possibly work. So Adria was in a relationship with a Snowdancer wolf called Martin, and she was the more dominant of the two of them. And initially she believed that this relationship was great. She really liked Martin. They were great together. And then things slowly began to change and their relationship became quite toxic as Martin began to resent her for her dominance. Most people around her could see that this was happening and that Martin wasn't treating her right. She didn't want to see that because she had chosen Martin. She'd made that choice and she was going to see the relationship out. And at the beginning of this book, we find out they've actually been separated for 12 months and Adria has just returned to the den and to the pack and is resuming her senior soldier role. And she's quite a gruff, very standoffish female character, which I've heard a lot of people talk about her as unlikable, and I can see why that is the case. I'm trying really hard to see past unlikable female characters and to see what's actually going on. So I don't really want to term her as an unlikable heroine. I want to sort of look at why she's the way she is. Since returning to the den, she is very standoffish with Riaz. Hawke eventually sends the two of them off to do a job to help out some packmates who have a broken down truck. Adria is an auto mechanic, so she's able to help out with that. And along the way, they're talking and Riaz tries to figure out what her problem with him is. They argue, they stop. They have this very intense scene where there's some questionable consent issues going on here, and it really highlights the start of this very tumultuous relationship that they have. Meanwhile, we know that Riaz has found his mate, but he can't have her. She's actually married to someone else. So he is coming to this story in a very rough place because his wolf knows that he will never actually have this person that it is drawn to. But what he does find is that he, the man, has this attraction to Adria even though they're driving each other crazy. And in fact, they insult each other quite a bit. So at one point, Adria offers him skin privileges, which is something that packmates do to one another. It's just the level of physical contact they're allowing each other, and he rebukes her quite badly. And obviously this sets her off because she's not in the right state to sort of even begin to contemplate what's going through his mind when he's being so rude. Their next encounter is at Hawke and Sienna's mating ceremony, which I'm going to talk a lot about later on, where they have another moment and she stops it because she tells him point blank, I don't want this if you are not going to respect me, which I think is really great to see that even though we have these scenes where it looks like these characters aren't able to control themselves or their urges, there are still aspects of them that are able to draw back and go, no, hang on a second, I don't want this, which is important to see. Eventually, Adria reveals a softer side to herself and Riaz is there and is able to hold her, and he doesn't ask her about it, he doesn't try to push the issue, he's just there for her, and that sort of begins this thawing out process that happens throughout the course of the rest of the book. Riaz is later involved in negotiations with Black Sea again, something I'll talk about in more depth later on, which is another changeling group, and Black Sea revealed to him that a group of Psy were executed on a boat in the middle of the ocean, and Black Sea found out about it, and they believe that the Human Alliance is involved in the executions. And so Riaz contacts Bowen, who is the head of the Human Alliance. We met him many books earlier. Bowen invites Riaz out to Venice, which is where he is based, to talk about it because it doesn't want to talk about it over an unsecure line. And so Riaz takes Adria out to Venice and the two of them meet with Bowen and find out exactly what's going on, which is the fact that the Psy are kidnapping humans and attempting mind control on them. So Bowen set himself up to be captured because he has recently been implanted with some technology that is designed to prevent the Psy from controlling his mind. And while he was there, he was able to kill his captors. Obviously, Riaz and Adria want to confirm some of what Bowen is saying, so they call Judd in to test out this implant and to see if he's telling the truth. And it turns out that this implant is very effective about stopping Psy from getting into a human's mind. There's a really cool description of it being almost like an electricity field around Bowen's mind. Judd also realizes that this technology has been fused to Bowen's brainstem, and so it can't be removed even if he wanted to. Also, this technology is still experimental, and it is very important in later books. While they're in Venice, Riaz buys a very lovely gift for Adria, some little glass wolves, and when he gives it to her, it prompts them to begin to have this discussion around their relationship and an honest discussion about their dominance issues and how they can get around it. And this comes up again when they're trying to figure out their living quarters, because while they're both dominant wolves, Riaz is higher up in the hierarchy because he is a lieutenant. A lot of Adria's fear in this relationship is that her partner will come to resent her, because that's exactly what happened in her relationship with Martin. So she's very scarred by that experience. And a lot of the reasons why she pushes people away is because she's trying to protect herself. Riaz is spearheading the discussion with the Snowdancer pack around reconsidering allying themselves with the Human Alliance. And as a result, Bowen comes back to the States to talk about this in more depth with Riaz, and he brings his communications expert, which is Lizette, who happens to be Riaz's mate. And we find out that she's currently separated from her husband. So this again causes tension in Adria and Riaz's relationship. Then we have another part of the story where the Psy-Net has collapsed and the Psy begin to ask for the Changeling's help. The net collapsed because an anchor was killed, and we know that the anchors are the Psy who are so intimately woven into the net that they stabilize it. And if an anchor is killed, basically a whole section of the net is blown out and any mind connected in that section dies. They've asked for the Changeling's help in protecting the anchors who are located within the San Francisco, Sierra Nevada area. There's a couple of scenes where they're all out supervising and looking after these different anchors, and in between that, Riaz gets into a fight with Hawke because he's being broody, and Hawke convinces him to go and talk to the pack librarian Dalton, who also happens to be Lara's grandfather, which I'd forgotten about. And he's talking to Dalton around whether there's any history of wolves choosing not to be with their mate, because what he's rapidly realizing is that he doesn't want to be with Lizette. His wolf knows that it's mated to her, but he physically wants to choose someone else. And they have this discussion around it, and at the end, Riaz becomes determined to pursue Adria and to make it work between the two of them. In doing this, he sort of talks his way into working alongside her to protect an anchor called Sonia, who is subsequently attacked while they're on protection detail. And the two of them are able to dispatch the attackers, and then they call in Aiden and Vasek, who come in and help clean up the scene. Afterwards, we get this scene where Adria is able to say a final goodbye to Martin. He actually comes to see her and they talk through sort of what happened in their relationship. A lot of that is closure for her, and so she's actually able to move on with her relationship with Riaz, and it ends with the two of them being able to commit to each other. So it's an actual choice that they're making. It's not a mating bond, it's not a magical connection that they've got to each other. They're actually choosing to be together, which is the first relationship of that kind that we've seen in the Changeling books. And I thought that was a really fascinating choice to have and to include. I mean, I think it's been mentioned in previous books, and I've forgotten which ones it's actually referenced in, but not every member of a changeling pack has to have a fated mate or a mating bond. And I thought it was a good choice to show that in a book, but I also think a lot of people struggle with it because Riaz and Adria are very hard characters to enjoy reading about, because they are hard characters. They're characters with a lot of anger and frustration that they're bringing into a relationship. So I would be very interested to see how it goes long term. But what I do like is that we see a relationship that is an actual choice, an intent. That was kind of cool, and that was probably the part of the relationship that I liked the best. But yes, that's Adria and Riaz's story. So the next section I'm going to talk about is Hawke and Sienna's storyline, which really continues in this one. So it's almost like Hawke and Sienna's story part 2. We really open this story with the pack beginning to plan for Hawke and Sienna's mating ceremony. Riley and Nell, who is one of the maternal dominants, are in charge of planning this ceremony, and Drew is helping because of course he is. How could he resist helping to plan a party? Alongside this, we see a lot of scenes just with Hawke and Sienna, and a lot of it is how they're negotiating living together, because Sienna's moved in with Hawke and they do have that age gap, and this does cause a little bit of tension at times because Sienna is still hanging out with her friends who are her age, and Hawke has his lieutenants and his responsibilities, and they're trying to make this situation work for them, and it's not always easy, and I appreciate seeing that. And they both have to compromise, and they both have to learn to listen to one another. And I think the really great thing that we get out of seeing all of these interactions is that they are dedicated to each other, they are determined to make it work, and that they listen to one another. And they're no longer making snap decisions, which was what was happening in previous books. Throughout this story, we also see a lot more of what Sienna's going through. So she is about to become the official mate of the alpha of the pack, and this comes with certain responsibilities, but she's also just a soldier, and so her rank within the pack is in almost two different places. She's almost at the top with her partner, but she's also in the middle of the ranks in terms of soldiers, and hierarchy is everything to the wolves. So both Hawke and Indigo encourage her throughout this story to actually get to know the different groups within the pack and to become familiar with them and to let them get to know her, because she almost has to become as trusted as Hawke. Probably not on the same level, but within that realm. And, you know, she's only 21 in this story, so she's very young, and that's a lot of responsibility. To do this, she ends up spending more time training with Adria because in a martial arts style that she's interested in. She also shadows some of the dominant maternal characters because they run the pack. The maternals are amazing, and I love that we got to see more of them in this story. And I completely forgot to say that Adria is a maternal dominant, which is a dominant wolf who has maternal instincts. And yeah, the maternals run the pack like clockwork. They're the ones that everyone is scared of, and they're fabulous. Nell is a delight, and Sienna is terrified of her at first, and Hawke spends a lot of time reassuring her, going, no, you're actually doing a good job with her because Nell is terrifying. Prior to his mating ceremony, Hawke is taken out by the lieutenants and they have a bit of fun. And it was just a really nice scene because I think the scenes that I live for in this book are those community scenes where we get to see how all these characters fit and what their relationships are and how they talk to one another. And it just makes it so cozy. And so this was a really beautiful scene between Hawke and all of his lieutenants who are really close friends with him. Then they have the mating ceremony, which is a really nice sort of party scene. And we have a beautiful scene with Hawke and Sienna getting ready for this ceremony beforehand. And then when they're actually there, we have all of the lieutenants repledging their allegiance to Hawke, which is something Hawke hadn't told Sienna about. And as such, we get to see a little bit more about this inner workings of the pack. And then it's a party afterwards and there's lots of dancing. There's a beautiful scene with Sienna and Toby and they're dancing, and it was nice to see those siblings together again, because I just live for any scenes between the Laurens. I think they're a really fascinating group of characters within this world. We also discover that because of Sienna's hierarchy ranking and being mated to the alpha, they've made a decision that Hawke won't be the one to give her orders, which I thought was a really smart choice actually. Instead, they have Riley, who is basically acting as Sienna's alpha because he's the most senior of the lieutenants. And so when an order needs to be given to Sienna, it's coming from Riley rather than Hawke, because for their relationship to work, Hawke and Sienna have to be a unit. And if he's constantly giving her orders, which we saw a lot of in Kiss of Snow, it begins to break down. So I thought that was a very clever thing that Nalini Singh had included, that little bit where, you know, it's okay, she can still take orders, but they're coming from someone else, someone who is basically impartial to her romantic relationship. Sienna is also still continuing to test the limits of her powers, and she's doing this with Judd and Walker, and they're sort of acting as support for her in this way. And then there are two scenes that really stood out to me with Hawke and Sienna in this particular book. The first one was a scene where they're talking about having kids, because they both want to have kids, but Sienna isn't ready because she's young and she's just not ready for that yet. And Hawke is also not ready because of everything that's going on in the world. And it's a really honest conversation because neither of them are pushing an issue. Neither of them are saying yes or no definitively. They're actually having a proper conversation about it. And it's also the first time that there is a conversation about someone in a mated pair who is using contraception, because Sienna's been on it for a couple of books. I don't think it was brought up in the previous book, but it was definitely brought up in this one, and not a big deal is made about it. And usually in paranormal romance books, contraception is not a thing at all. It just stood out to me as being another thing that was included that was relevant and timely and appropriate, and a way of showing that not everyone's just trying to pop out kids. And the cutest scene in this book was just Sienna convincing Hawke to make cookies with her. It takes them a while to get it right. It is a bit disastrous initially, but the whole scene was just very gorgeous and very domestic and just so lovely and just very them. All right, enough gushing about those two. So then we come to a lot of the world things. So we open up the book with a prologue, and the prologue always sets up a part of the greater world story that's going on, usually to do with the Psy. And in this case, they're talking about how the Psy net is rotting from the inside out. There's a rot inside the Psy net that's not necessarily people. It might actually just be a physical thing. And we'll revisit that in a minute. In this section, I'm going to talk about some specific world building stuff that's going on, as well as some more general stuff that just happens that doesn't have a lot of arc to it yet, but is important for later on. The first section is Alice Eldridge. So she is the scientist who was researching empaths and Xi, and then mysteriously disappeared, only to be recovered by Caleb recently and handed over to Judd because she was in cryonic suspension. She is unconscious for most of the book, but all of the healers in the story, so we have Lara from Snowdancer, Tamsin from Dark River, and then you have Amara and Shire, who all work in medicine. They're all talking about ways they could possibly wake her up. And there's quite a few emails that go backwards and forwards between all of these characters, and some of the interplay between them is fantastic, especially revisiting Amara and Ashire and their relationship, because Amara is still Amara and I adore her. And then eventually Amara and Ashire come up with a way that should hopefully wake up Alice, and Lara's there and Sasha is there, and Sasha is using her empathic ability to help augment some of the medical treatment that Amara and Ashire have organised, and Alice does eventually wake up. We don't spend a huge amount of time with her, but there is another scene where Judd visits her and she recognises him as an Arrow, and as it turns out she knew Zaid Adalea, who was the very first Arrow. This begins to set up things for future books, particularly once we get into the Arrows books, which are coming up, and I'm very excited. We talked a little bit earlier about Black Sea. So Black Sea are the ocean changelings. They are not one particular group of changelings. They are made up of multiple animals and they just sort of work together like a big conglomerate. We begin to see the beginning of the negotiations between Snowdancer and Black Sea. Black Sea wants an alliance with Snowdancer and they want the ability to move freely within Snowdancer territory. Snowdancer contemplates this a bit because Black Sea has traditionally been very secretive and not much is known about them, and it has been conventionally thought, or what they outwardly project, is that they don't have an alpha, but a lot of people who are sort of in the know that there is a woman called Meowth Vader who is the alpha of the Black Sea group. Hawke assigns Kenji, another one of the lieutenants, and Riaz to take charge of the negotiations, but does tell them that any alliance is contingent on Hawke being able to meet Meowth face to face, because that's how they do business, and they're willing to negotiate as long as both sides give something in order to make the deal happen. And there is a scene later in the book where Hawke, Riley, Kenji and Riaz actually go to meet Meowth, as well as Anani, who is their representative in the negotiations, and Malachi, who is Meowth's second. We come back to these three characters briefly throughout the Psy-Changeling series, but then during Ocean Light, which is the second book of the Psy-Trinity series, there is an entire book set within Black Sea. And again, I'm very excited to reread that one because I haven't reread it in a while, and now I have all this background knowledge that I'm paying attention to. I'm hoping that I will pick up on things I missed the first time. Okay, then we come to Caleb's storyline, because Caleb has been a big presence in the last few books. So we know that the Psy net is rotting from the inside out and Caleb is very aware of it. We also know that he's keeping track of an individual Psy who seems to have contracted this same disease that is affecting the Psy net, and he's monitoring what's actually happening to this Psy in hopes that he'll be able to see some way of using this person as a benchmark for what's happening in the Psy net, because he's a very calculating person like that. Interestingly enough, we learn that Caleb is one of the Psy who, like Nikita and Anthony, doesn't mind working with the changelings if it is to the benefit of himself. So he subcontracts some security work to the Black Edge Wolves, and this is sort of an early indicator that he is willing to work alongside changelings if they have a common need and a common goal. We know that anchors have begun to die or be killed off, and Caleb and Aiden begin to investigate some of these deaths. There is some debate about whether or not Henry Scott had survived the attack on the changelings in the previous book, and when Caleb discovers that Henry is in fact alive, he authorizes the arrows to eliminate Henry Scott as a threat, and Aiden is eventually able to locate Henry, and Bassick is the one to kill him. And I find this really fascinating because we have these characters who will eventually become heroes of their own stories, but it is a reminder that they are dangerous individuals, and that forms a big part of them. A bit like how we constantly see that Judd is dangerous, and even though we love him because he's a major part of this world and he has grown so much, he is still capable and will still carry out orders to protect the safety of others. We see that a lot with the Arrows and former Arrows in later books. And then Caleb is revealed to the rest of the world to be a dual cardinal when he assists in the Cape Dorset attacks, which is the storyline that we had with the changelings helping the Psy out when the anchors are being killed. And Cape Dorset is the first time this happens, and it results in 517 deaths, I think. And Caleb is there to help stabilize the net and to stop it from tearing even further. But in doing so, it does reveal his true capabilities to the majority of the populace. Speaking of Judd, we see that he is continuing to train with William. So William is the nephew of Dev, who has the same Psy ability as Judd, so he's a TK cell, and training has been ongoing in the background in previous books. We also find out that Judd has been taking lessons from Ben in how to work with children, i.e. bribing them with chocolate to do the things that they need to do, even if they're scared of doing them. And Judd is a pretty fantastic teacher, bribery aside. So that was a really nice scene. And then when Judd is called to Venice, Aiden is there and promises that he will watch over William in Judd's absence, which is great because what we do get is these little scenes now where Judd is beginning to reconnect with the Arrows, who he considered brothers. So there's a whole lot of little scenes dotted throughout this book where they have these moments of interaction, including another scene where Aiden reveals that he's preparing to take over the Arrows as soon as the timing is right. But part of the reason why Aiden meets with Judd before he goes to Venice is because in Venice there is a group of former Arrows who are considered dead, who are living in the city, and Aiden wants Judd to go and visit them. And when Judd does go to visit them, there we meet Ezrah, who does play a part in another book, and a couple of the other former Arrows. What we find out is that they're still a very insular group, and they haven't really integrated into society like the Psy, who have become members of the Changeling Packs, because they're still very Psy-like in their abilities. They still maintain silence, and they still find it hard to connect with the other races. But it was a really nice way of leading into the fact that there are these Arrows who have defected and are living in hiding. And we do get to see them again later on. But it's a really smart way of showing the beginning of a connection to the Changeling Packs through Judd by introducing them this way. Other little plot points. Ming LeBon knows that the Lorens are still alive. He is not convinced that he could take out Judd, but he wants Sienna back, and so he begins to plot that. And this includes sort of stalking some of Sienna's patrol routes when she is working. When he does try to abduct her during one of her patrols, it obviously results in her having to reconsider the roles that she's taking on within the pack, and having to acknowledge that, you know, she can't just keep putting herself in danger, because it also has the flow-on effect of putting the pack in danger. So Ming continues to be someone who needs to be dealt with quite badly. Throughout the story, Vasquez is the Psy who is basically acting as Henry's mouthpiece and taking control of Pure Psy and moving the goals forward. Henry did survive book 10, but he lost the majority of his limbs, and obviously was killed before the end of the book. And Vasquez is not really a leader on his own. He's a soldier. He was originally trained as an Arrow as a child, but they discontinued his training because he was deemed not suitable for becoming an Arrow. And so now he is the one leading the charge for Pure Psy. Another really interesting fact that came up was this idea of the pregnancy rate of changelings. So at one point, Adria is put in charge of training the 14 to 18-year-old submissive wolves. And it turns out that the Snow Dancer pack has a significantly higher portion of juvenile wolves. Despite the fact that changelings have a lower frequency of pregnancy overall, because Snow Dancer experienced traumatic loss on a really grand scale when they had their massacre, when their alpha and the majority of their senior wolves were killed. That sort of traumatic loss impacts the community so greatly that they actually tend to have more births rather than not, as a way of rebuilding numbers. And so as a result of everything that happened all those years ago, they now have a high number of teenagers. I thought it was a really interesting sort of little bit of information that was thrown into the story. And it just adds to this, you know, greater knowledge of how the packs work. It's just that world building stuff that doesn't seem significant, but in terms of carrying a story and helping people to understand exactly what's going on, Nalini just builds in these little things over time in a way that's relevant, rather than just throwing it all into an initial book and hoping that people remember it later on. We find out that Vasek has a secondary talent, so he's a natural born teleporter, so he can teleport anywhere. But teleporters are telekinetics, and his secondary telekinetic ability is the ability to draw out blood and little tiny samples on a very focused scale, I suppose, out of a crime scene. And it just reminds me very much of collecting evidence in forensics. When one of the anchors is attacked, he's actually able to draw all of the blood and broken elements out of the room in order to make the room look new again, which is really interesting when it comes to the next book, Heart of Obsidian. I'm going to come back to this idea because it's a very finessed kind of skill to have, and I'd forgotten that Vasek was able to do that. We also learn that he was raised by another TKV called Peyton, I think it might be Patton, who was basically the only person who could contain Vasek as a child, because natural born teleporters can just teleport anywhere they want whenever they think about it. So if you imagine a baby natural born teleporter just zipping around everywhere, he actually needed someone who could contain him, which just adds to another tragic backstory. At the very end, Judd meets with the ghost again, and the ghost reveals that it is time. Time for what? So something's about to happen. And also Caleb finds her. So we know that he's been looking for someone for ages, and he's finally found her. And that is the start of Heart of Obsidian, which I've started reading, and I had forgotten how dark it was. Like, I knew it was dark. I'd forgotten how dark. So stay tuned. That video will be coming very soon. And then finally, my fun things. This is my favorite section because, like I said, Nalini Singh just includes all these little moments that are just so lovely. There's mention of the fact that after Kiss of Snow, where Judd and Sienna basically revealed the true extent of their abilities, I I would say they're probably really right up there with being just below Caleb in terms of raw power, because Judd is only like 0.3, 0.4 off of being a dual cardinal like Caleb. So they're quite powerful. But some of the lieutenants are worried that people are going to actually begin to become afraid of them, because up until this point they hadn't really known the true extent of what Judd and Sienna were capable of. And so they're subtly reinforcing to their packmates just how much they've done for the community and how great they are, and making sure that all of the good things that they've done are being remembered and noted by other people. And they're doing it without telling Judd and Sienna that. But you have the wolves looking out for their Psy packmates, which I just thought was really great. I loved the scene where Sienna and Evie have a girls' night in Sienna and Hawke's quarters, because it ties back into that whole dynamic that Hawke and Sienna have, where they're trying to negotiate their new relationship and their friendship groups, because they are very different groups of people. Hawke doesn't want Sienna to miss out on those friendships that she has, and so the girls have this wonderful night in, and it's just really fun and really cute. Judd has a fan club outside of the pack, and I'm all here for it. I volunteer myself as president of that fan club, just saying. When Hawke and Sienna have their mating ceremony, the ghost watches from a distance, and it's sort of the first time that we've seen him come into pack territory and watch what they're doing in a situation that's not, you know, violent and bloody. So he's just watching the mating ceremony from a distance, which may or may not become significant later on. There is a really cute scene where Tamsin is visiting the den, and she's brought Roman and Julian are now best friends with Ben. And when the three of them get up into mischief, their consequence is that they won't get to play with Ben if they don't start behaving themselves. And it was just adorable. There's a really great scene where all of the lieutenants and some of the senior soldiers have dinner at Riley and Mercy's house. You have people bringing their partners, so Hawke and Sienna go, Brenna and Judd turn up, Bastion, Mercy's brother, is there, and he's doing all the cooking because apparently he's a great cook. But again, this ties back into Hawke and Sienna's relationship, because he begins to realize that she's the youngest person there and she is surrounded by his friends and essentially her commanding officers. And he then says, well, why don't you invite your friends? Because the more the merrier. And I thought it was a really nice way of showing how they're negotiating and they're finding compromise on that as well. And also just a nice way to see different aspects of the Snow Dancer pack interacting with each other as well. We also find out that Mercy is pregnant, and everyone is really worried about how Riley is going to go hovering over Mercy. And she actually takes it pretty well. Like, she's really, really good. And there's a beautiful scene where he says, why are you allowing me to coddle you and to check in on you? Why aren't you telling me off? And she says, no, because I know that's what you need to do. It just shows how beautiful their relationship is. And then Faith foresees that Mercy is going to have triplets and all hell breaks loose. So I'm really excited because I remember this part of the series and I love it. And Mercy is just awesome. So I'm glad she gets that storyline as well. And then one totally random thing that just came out in the middle of nowhere. So Tomas, who is one of the other Snow Dancer lieutenants, is developing a video game called Wolves vs. Leopards. And Indigo is playing it while waiting for one of the lieutenant meetings to start. And Judd happens to overlook it and offers a critique that the fact that the game favours the wolves and that if they want the leopards to play the game, it needs to be evened out a little bit more. And so he ends up being volunteered as the impartial test player for the game. And it was just a really completely random, completely cute little scene that's thrown in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a very stressful situation, and I was living for it. So that is everything that happened in Tangle of Need, and who knows how long this video is. I'm really sorry guys, because apparently I can't make these videos short because I just need to talk about everything. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I think if I was just rating it purely on Adria Riaz's story, I probably wouldn't rate it higher than a 3. But with everything else that went on in the story, it's definitely a 4-star book because so much happens and we get all of those interactions between all of the Snow Dancer characters, and it was fantastic. Plus, we get the intro to Black Sea, and I am living for it. In the comments below, feel free to chat to me about the book. Next time we will be talking about Heart of Obsidian, and I don't know if I'm ready to finish reading that book. I started it, and I have feelings, so stay tuned. I hope that wherever you're in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I'll see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye, everyone.